What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. We got some more Endymion Pendulum duels for you guys to check out, showing you what the ceiling of this deck is from a go first and go second perspective. Honestly, it really doesn't seem to matter if this deck opens or if it is going second, because the ceiling of this deck is just so ridiculously absurd that it can make boards that literally no deck in Yu-Gi-Oh can easily beat, or it can go second and it can simply break a board that your opponent has made, no matter how strong it seems to be. And really, I think that a lot of people still believe that this deck is, kind of far out, but that's not true. This deck is coming out just next month. So you're talking about a few weeks, April 20th, April 19th, somewhere around that for the TCG. I think it's going to be time to bust out, things like Anti-Spell Fragrance and Imperial Order, cards that are also good against Sky Striker. It might be time to use those against this deck, because this deck, once it gets rolling, is just like ridiculous. And you can play Pot of Desires, you can play Pot of Extravagance, because the deck does Pendulum Summon, but it's not nearly as reliant as like the old Pendulum builds, which I think when this deck comes out, I think the old Pendulum decks are just going to die out. Like, people will just switch to this because the ceiling is just so much higher. So you guys will see here, opens up with the Mythical Institution. It's kind of important that you get one of those spell counter cards online early, either Mythical Institution or Endymion. You can play Magic Lab, the new card that's coming out in the structure deck. I don't think it's necessary. I think Institution is like a little better. He gets Heavy Metaphors, Electromite. I'm not gonna lie, he did get a lucky draw. He got Pot of Desires off the top end. He's going to get two extremely good cards off of his Desires. Messing up your deck doesn't matter, because he gets a copy of Spell Power Control, which will get him another Endymion card and another spell counter on field, and then he also gets Terraforming. So those are both like live cards, and it's just really nice that he was able to get those specific cards, because you're going to be able to see a Pendulum Summon of 4 here. And then he's also going to use the Sorcerer Supreme effect from the Pendulum Scale to summon that after playing his Endymion or his Mythical Citadel. And you can just see that this board is just like ridiculous. Now, the thing about this is, and this is the mistake that Konami, I think, made, they're going to learn the hard way about this, is the fact that all of these monsters, every single one, he has double copies of Jackal and then 3 Sorcerer Supreme. None of these cards are hard once per turns, and every single one of them has built-in negation. Your Sorcerer Supremes are basically FA Don Dragsters. They can even negate the effects of spells and traps. So if your opponent has like a Trickstar Reincarnation in their graveyard, you can negate the summon effect of that. And then your Jackals are just, they're like Divine Wraths or Solemn Strikes. They can negate monster effects. And the thing is, you can put any card in your hand that can hold spell counters. So he can use all 5 of these negations in a turn. He can simply use the Sorcerer Supreme. He can bounce these 2 cards and then bounce a Jackal after it's used its effect. Like, it's not going to matter. And then if his opponent doesn't have a board, he knows he's getting OTK'd, because these monsters all have over 2,000 attacks. So obviously it's like game on board already. His opponent is playing Rockets. You can take that with a grain of salt, but let's be real, even if you were playing a meta deck, if you were playing Thunder Dragons or Orcus or something, how are you beating this? Honestly, like, oh, you got 1 kaiju? Cool. Now you have 4 negates to deal with and a kaiju. So I don't think like you need Spear mode to actually break this board. You'd have to get rid of like all 3 copies of Sorcerer Supreme, or you'd have to get like rid of all the Jackals and Sorcerer Supreme. It would just be so incredibly difficult to deal with 5 negates. I don't really know what meta deck could actually deal with it, but that's fine. You guys will say, Cap, he went first. He got lucky off the Desires. GG, no re. All right, we'll give him that, but don't worry, guys. Even when you go second, you can still pop off with this deck. And by the way, for those of you guys who think like old Pendulums will still be the way of the future, this duel will basically show you why old Pendulums will, in my opinion, I think old Pendulums are going to die out. I think that the Endymion Pendulums will be the way of the future. Pendulum player is going to go first. He's going to get like the epitome of what Pendulums want to do. I mean, I'm talking no hand traps, no disruption. Dude gets Electromite. He's going to get everything that he wants. But the fact that the Endymion cards activate as Pendulum Scales just make them so good. Like, they don't rely so much on the Pendulum Summon. So you can see he's going to get Jackal on field. The second he gets a spell on that, that's going to be a negation, which he doesn't currently, but don't worry, he will. And he even gets the Amorphous Sloth, which, I've seen some Pendulum players play. Amorphous Sloth is, it's basically the same thing as the Amorphous Goliath that the Blue Eyes players play. They'll summon it back from their graveyard with the Art Brave Dragon. It stops your opponent from special summoning from their extra deck as long as it's not an Amorphous monster. So essentially, it is Domain of the True Monarchs, and it kind of like floodgates your opponent out of the extra deck. And this is why the Endymion Magician negations are just better. They're not super reliant on their extra deck. Even when you open with a copy of freaking Destrudo. Now the thing about this is his opponent did not have a counter on the Jackal, so the Jackal wasn't live. But he said, you know what, Cap, I'm gonna spot this guy. I'm gonna give him a handicap. I'll let him have the Jackal and I'll still beat him. Well, not 3 negations, but he has, you know, domain essentially here. He has a negation with the Vortex, and then he has another negation with the Jackal. But it's not honestly gonna matter. His opponent is going to first activate Little Jackal, and I think he's going to just add another card, or you can see that he's going to add another Pendulum card. His opponent basically has to go ahead and negate the copy of Servant. This is one of the best cards in the deck. It gets you to your Sorcerer Supreme. The problem is he has another copy of Servant, so that negation like didn't honestly matter, and he should be able to just search the Sorcerer Supreme anyways off of the grasp, and he's going to play it here. This is why this deck is like really good. You do not necessarily need to start with the Pendulum summon. Also, the fact that Sorcerer Supreme activates as a spell effect, not a monster effect. This is why it's OP. You can basically break boards, you know, kind of activating as a Pendulum skill. So he's going to activate that, pops all his opponent's problem cards, 4 of them. Now his opponent has a pretty crappy and mediocre board, and now he can actually just start like doing plays. He's not even going to go for Electromite. He just says, I'm going to go for Arcanite Magician, Cap G. And guess what? Arcanite Magician can use spell counters from anywhere on the field. Let's just see how many spell counters he has on Citadel. Oh, he has 10 of them on the field. So yeah, he can blow out about 10 cards. Yeah, he can blow up 10 cards on his opponent's side of the field. Obviously, that means he can GG him. Doesn't matter if his pendulum scales are protected from Pendulum Call. He can still easily just OTK him with these 3 monsters. So you see that he didn't even need to use Electromite, didn't need to use some massive Pendulum summon or anything like that, and he was still able to break his opponent's board through 2 negations and a domain effect that locked him out of the extra deck. It just didn't matter. Like, this is why this is going to be the Pendulum deck of the future, in my opinion, because I just don't think that the old Pendulums, they just can't match what the Endymion cards can do. Like going first, 5 negates versus 2 negates, you know, going second, being able to easily break your opponent's board without even using your extra deck. It's just too much pressure on your opponent to honestly deal with. So we'll pause for one quick second and we'll see what the deck looks like. Okay, so this is what the deck looks like on paper, and this seems like an incredibly solid build. I mean, obviously, it kind of looks very similar to what you're used to seeing from Pendulum Magicians because you're running a whole lot of monsters. You're also just using a whole lot of spells, really no trap cards. Not a lot of room when you run Pendulum decks for like hand traps, so don't really worry about that. But the reason you're seeing even more spell cards in here, and you're seeing things like, you know, Upstart Goblin, which it might look a little weird, like why run Upstart Goblin in a deck that's almost 45 cards? It's because you want to be activating like a lot of spells so that you get the spell counters. Like normal Pendulum Magicians would not have to worry about activating a bunch of spells for the most part, but in this deck obviously you do. You have to have, or you want to have, as many spells on, or as many spell counters on as possible on things like your Mythical Institution or your Endymion or even your Endymion Lab. This is my least favorite of the 3 cards. I think that Institution and the regular Endymion are just like far better cards, but I mean, I guess running this is still perfectly fine. But yeah, you want to run as many spells as possible. I personally don't think that hand traps are necessary in a lot of these Pendulum builds, because if you go first, you saw what you can build. Like, you don't need any hand traps if you're putting freaking 4 or 5 negates on board, and you're also having like an Electromite. You're ending with like 5 or 6 monsters, and then even when you go second, your main tool should just kind of be using your cards to put as many spell counters on board, trying to break your opponent's board. So, you know, hand traps could be dead in certain matchups, but your own engine cards will like never technically be dead. So, you know, I don't really feel like you actually need to run a whole bunch of hand traps that might be good, might not be good. You play Guru Control, the hand trap's dead, etc., etc. I think it's kind of cool that you see Destrudo be used in here, but it's not for like Yazi or anything like that. It's basically for you know, cards like Arcanite, and Arcanite is a card that can kind of solo break an entire board because Arcanite can use spell counters from anywhere on the field. And as you guys saw, I think the Endymion had the Mythical Citadel. This card had like 10 counters on it, and Arcanite can obviously blow up 2 cards because it gets 2 counters the turn that it's summoned. So he could have potentially popped 12 cards with just Arcanite Magician alone. Your opponent can only have, what, 12 cards on field? Well, I guess with the extra monster zone, it can be a little more. And, you know, yeah, well, I think it's exactly 12 with the field zone and the extra monster zone. So you can see how you can basically easily kind of break boards with Sorcerer Supreme and with the Arcanite Magician. But it also does open up the possibility of running things like F.A. Don Dragster for even more negation, or Odd Eyes Meteor Burst, which is a card that lets you summon a monster from your Pendulum scale, which can be cool if you summon a Cerberus that's like 2800 attack or something like that. Cerberus also has an effect that can give you even more damage. So yeah, I feel like this is going to be the wave of the future. I think the only question we'll have now is how much is the deck going to cost, because obviously all the Endymion cards are going to be in the structure deck. So this could be very similar to like Salamangreats, but these cards are from Extreme Force, and if they're not reprinted, I have no doubt in my mind they're going to be crazy expensive. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the duel. Let me know what you guys think of Endymions in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.